Well, there wasn't any jobs when I got out of high school in 1941, and they had some Navy personnel out at the high school soliciting, for recruits. And so when I just joined the Navy.
So now, what was it about the Navy that appealed to you?
Well, I guess just traveling, I guess. Well, I don't suppose the worst thing was I had scarlet fever, and they put me on a ship for 3 weeks, while I had that. An old ship that was moored alongside.
Like a hospital ship, basically?
No, well, I guess it was, yes. It was someplace just to isolate you. That was right after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I mean, I remember, when we left San Francisco and headed off toward the southwest, that we were evidently going someplace down by New Zealand, where we wound up at. And I always remember the ocean and seeing the flying fish and things like that. I just liked the ocean, I guess. Yeah, because, I was on a ship loaded with about 6,000 tons of bombs, and I didn't think anything about it.
On that ship?
Well, you were just young and dumb. It was a merchant ship, and they were just hauling, war supplies to a different part of the world. Well, I came back to New York. In New York, they sent me home on a 30-day leave. Then I went back to San Francisco, and then they put us on the Lipscomb Likes, and that was a ship of about 3 years old. It was a real modern ship, nice-looking ship, and we ran aground. We hit a submerged reef going back to New Caledonia, and we had to abandon ship. So then we saw later that the ship wasn't going to sink. It was just sitting on the reef. The destroyer came out and picked us up the next day. Well, we were just hauling war supplies, mostly bombs, trucks, and other things like that. Yes, we had a lot of freedom. I mean, on the first ship I was on, we got to Australia, the lieutenant that was in charge of the coast artillery gave me a pass to go ashore and said, "Good until sailing." So we were there a couple of weeks. We'd go ashore, and the food was real great after being on a ship. On the first ship I was on, going from San Francisco down to New Zealand. It took us about 25 days, I think, but all you did was you just watched the ocean and looked around. We were blacked out, we didn't have any lights at night, that would show. I knew my brother in the Air Force was in England, and my oldest brother was in France, and I knew my other brother was in the Navy. I kind of kept track of him a little bit, but I never did see him.
How would you communicate with all of them?
Just writing, letters. The last ship I was on, when I left New Orleans, I went to Galveston, and there I was on an auxiliary tanker called SS Farino. And from there we went to Guantanamo Bay. We was loaded with oil, went to Guantanamo Bay, back through the Panama Canal over to Bora Bora and the Society Islands, which was a real, nice looking place, beautiful. We went there to Australia again, to Cairns and Townsville, and then down to Brisbane. Then the Navy took over the ship, and they named it the USS Ariat, Arayat. And from there we went to Milne Bay, New Guinea, and we'd just sit in the bay there, and when ships come in, we'd give, fuel them up. And I guess we were there maybe 6 or 8 months, and then we went to Hollandia, New Guinea, and done the same thing. And I was there when the war ended. And then I was moved to Manus Island, which was a staging area. And from there, I came back to the United States on the USS Pickaway. And I then went from Los Angeles to St. Louis, where I discharged from the Navy. The only announcement I remember is we were in Hollandia when President Roosevelt died. And I was probably the first one on the ship to know it because I got a message from the signal tower that he'd passed away. Well, sometimes, John, when we were in the New Hebrides, I had a friend and we buddied around. Well, he wanted to go ashore to see if he could find some ivory. He thought from boar tusk or something like this. So we had a little rowboat on the ship, and we rowed that over to one of the islands, and we looked around all over the island. We never did find anything. We walked over to the other side. Well, coming back, we stopped at, I guess I consider it a farmhouse. I don't know what it was, but it was a Frenchman that lived there. He invited us in to eat, so and the food was just normal, but the thing I remember about it was we sat at the table, and he had a board of about 6 feet long and 1 by 12, something like that, hanging on the ropes, and they had a servant that swung that back and forth, so we'd have a breeze there. And then when we left there, he had an old truck, and then he had a son about 13 or 12, something like that, so he drove us back to the other side of the island, and he stopped and got bananas, I guess a tree, I don't call it a tree, I don't know what they call it, cut us off a bunch of bananas and told us, take these back on ship, sprinkle a little salt at the end where you cut them off, and they'll ripen faster. And I didn't have anything to give him, so I gave the boy my pocket knife. I remember that experience, I always wondered about somebody on an island like that, it probably never went anywhere. Well, I used to play chess a lot, but it wasn't. One thing we did probably was it drove the captain crazy. In Australia, the coins over there have more silver in them than the American coins, and we'd take the coins and pound them with a hammer, and just keep pounding them and turning them, and make rings out of them. I made 2 or 3 rings. I don't have them anymore. I think my son has them. I was communicating with a girl that I'd met earlier. Well, when I was in when I was in the service, I knew a teacher real well, and she gave people names, so the kids in high school could write to them. And one girl wrote to me, I knew her brothers. As later I married her.
So you met her as a pen pal during the war?
Huh? Yeah. She communicated with me,
Did you go
Well, I got back in October, 1st November, and I got married next July. Well, I went to the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and for 2 years on the GI Bill, because I was working part-time at the General Mills in the Products Control Laboratory down there, and then I went to work at Westinghouse. Westinghouse had a contract with the AEC. the Atomic Energy Commission.
Okay.
And that's, you know, that work was all classified and everything. So I worked there, and I worked in the in the department that made blade castings for jet engines. Well, I hate to see them send troops overseas. Well, I think military service, a period, you know, is good for an individual, but as long as they don't get into, you know, war, I think it's good for them. It helps them grow up.